Hi, I'm Gareth Green and welcome to another video in our series Inside the Mind of Bach. And you might well be intrigued by the title, Bach Goes Wacky, because why have I called it this? Well, Bach often uses the most amazing harmony. He uses chromatic chords, he uses unexpected modulations, and some of these chorales that he writes are relatively straightforward. Other chorales get much more complicated and more chromatic, and this chorale that we're going to have a think about today does a number of things that are really kind of pushing the boundaries, particularly when you think that Bach was a Baroque composer, and it must have been utterly shocking to the ears of his contemporaries. So I thought we might just unpack what's a bit wacky about this, because it's Bach well ahead of his time. Have a listen to this chorale and you'll hear that some of it sounds perfectly normal, if you like, for a Bach chorale, and some of it you might think, gosh, I wonder what's going on there. And those are the corners we're going to look at. Here's the chorale. Okay, well, you'll have heard that the opening, for example, is nothing terribly radical. The chorale begins with 4 descending notes. We're in B flat major, and it just comes down the scale from the tonic to the dominant. You might expect the first phrase to be in the key of B flat major, because that's the home key of the chorale. Actually, Bach does something that he does do in a number of other chorales. He starts in the tonic key and modulates to the dominant. So we go from B flat major to F major in the space of those 4 notes. Okay, the tonic chord of F major is also the dominant chord of B flat major, so it's modulated, but it's still using a chord at the cadence that belongs to the home key. So nothing over radical there. So let's skip over the first phrase for a moment and move on to the second phrase, where things start to be a bit more wacky. So what's going on in the second phrase? Wonderful stuff, isn't it? Now, what is going on here? Because at the end of the second phrase, we arrive on the tonic chord of G minor. Nothing radical about G minor, because that's the relative minor of B flat major, so that's fair enough. But when you look at the original tune from the beginning, we're coming down these 4 notes, and then we're repeating and going back up again. So a lot of people would be tempted to do something rather boring with the harmony there, wouldn't they? And Bach's trying to make it interesting. So he modulates to the dominant as he comes down, and then as he goes up, he ends up in the relative minor. So the modulations are helping to keep life kind of fairly busy. Let's have a look at this cadence for a moment. We're finishing on chord 1 in G minor. So you're thinking, okay, so this must be a 5-1 cadence or a 4-1 cadence. It's neither of those things, because what is this chord that comes as the first of the cadence chords? Well, that chord is actually a diminished 7th chord. Okay, now in the key of G minor, if we build a diminished 7th on chord 7, which is how we can key reference a diminished 7th chord, we find chord 7 is F sharp, A, C. To make it a diminished 7th, put the E flat on the top, all minor thirds. F sharp to A, minor third, A to C, minor third, C to E flat, minor third. So he's actually going diminished 7th in its second inversion to chord 1 in G minor. So a slightly unusual cadence, wouldn't you say? But there we are, bit chromatic. Now, what's he doing earlier in the phrase? Well, the first chord of the phrase is chord 5-7 in its last inversion in the key of B flat? Well, remember, he's just modulated to F major there, and you could say, well, that's nothing more than a secondary dominant in F major. It's just going 5-1 in F major, then carry on in B flat major. But it is cadencing in F major. So it's slightly more significant because if we're cadencing in a new key, well, we've kind of modulated to it. But here we've got a 5-7 in its last inversion. Bach often likes to use his 5-7s in last inversion. But normally you would expect that to resolve to a chord 1 or a chord 6 because we're trying to get the third to move upwards by step and the seventh to fall by step. Does he manage to do that? Well, he does. The third rises by step, the seventh falls by step. But this is not a chord 1 or a chord 6, so that's a little bit unusual. And you might also say to yourself, what is D flat doing in the bass? Because that's got nothing to do with the key of G minor that we're going to. It's got nothing to do with F major that we've just left. It's got nothing to do with B flat major, the home key. So it just seems like it doesn't altogether come as an expected resolution of this 5-7 chord. And what's it doing there? But the voice leading works after the 5-7. So that's a clever little touch, isn't it? Well, okay, if he'd gone to something like D natural in the bass with a B flat in the tenor, well, that would have made more sense. And it could have been a 1B chord, a 1 in first inversion in B flat. It could have been a sort of G minor second inversion if it had progressed on to, say, a chord 5 in G minor, which you might think, well, he could have done that, couldn't he? He could have gone 1C in G minor, 5-1 in G minor, but he's used this chord. Well, this chord is a kind of chromatic 2-7B in the key of F. Let's think about that for a moment. If I'm in the key of F, chord 2 is G, B flat, D, make it a 7th, and it's there. If I chromatically alter it by using D flat instead of D natural, then I've borrowed it from the parallel minor. So in fact, it's a 2-7, and it's a 2-7 in second inversion that he's written from F minor, borrowed from F minor. Now, bear in mind, we were in F major, so this is a borrowed chord from F minor. But it's a bit radical, isn't it? Because we went to F major, then we used a 5-7 back in B flat major, but then we tucked in this borrowed chord from F minor. Then we went diminished 7th in G minor to 1 in G minor. Now that is a bit wacky, but it's a wonderful moment, isn't it? Terrific. So there's the first bit of really wacky behavior on Bach's part, and don't we just love it? Okay, where are we going from there? Well, we've just cadenced in G minor. Let's see what the next phrase brings. Well, we go 5-7 in first inversion in G minor to chord 1 in G minor. So you see, he has his wacky moments and then he goes back to normal. That's fine. Then what does he do? Well, we use a D minor chord next. If you're in the key of G minor, you might expect that chord to have an F sharp in it. But of course it could have an F natural in it if we're using chord 5 but referencing it to a descending melodic minor. Or it could just be that we're kind of doing that, but we're using it as a means of modulation. So it could be a pivot chord, but so could the previous chord, because this is 1 in G minor, but it's also 2 in the key of F, and that's where we're going. So if this is 1 in G minor, a pivot chord that's 2 in F, then we go 6 with a passing note, and then we go dominant 7th, last inversion with a passing note. Then we've got accented passing note in the bass going on here. And then we've got a 4-3 suspension in the tenor, which is decorated, and it takes us on to a 5-1 cadence in the key of F. So really, there's nothing wacky going on in that phrase. It's just Bach being Bach with his use of accented passing notes and a decorated suspension. It's rather beautiful. You might have noticed that the middle parts are sort of switched around. You know, the tenor part's above the alto part. Slightly unusual, but these things happen. But it's really reasonably normal behavior. Then The next, well, for Bach anyway, then the next phrase is very plain, really. Let's see the next phrase and hear it. It's like he's saying, well, I've just done a quite decorated phrase and I had that wacky bit earlier on. Let's just be plain and simple. In B flat major, he goes 1 in first inversion, 7 in first inversion to 1. So it's a kind of replacement passing 6/4, 1 in first inversion, 7 in first inversion to 1, and then on to 5. So just an imperfect cadence in B flat major. Perfectly normal. So then you think, okay, he's got over that wacky stuff earlier, he's recovered. Well, what happens in the next phrase? Well, first of all, he starts on that chord 5 in B flat major, so no surprise there. And you might think he's going to go to 1 in B flat major, which he almost does. But notice he doesn't quite, because he puts A flat in the tenor. And you're immediately thinking, what's A flat doing there? Well, instead of going to 1, he goes with A flat. Well, A flat, add that to the key signature. You've got 2 flats, B flat and E flat. The next flat in the sequence of key signatures is A flat. Do we know a key with 3 flats? Yes, we do. E flat major. Could be C minor, but think E flat major for a moment, because this is a dominant 7th in the key of E flat major. Okay, that's fine. That's not wacky. It's only 1 key away from B flat major. So what are we expecting it to do? We're expecting that dominant 7th to maybe resolve to the tonic of E flat major. And, you know, we're sort of thinking, well, the 7th is going to fall by step. It does. We're expecting the 3rd to rise by step. It doesn't. So something slightly unusual there. And when we get to this chord, we're not quite hearing a tonic chord of E flat major. We're expecting that maybe, or even better, we're expecting that to happen. Instead of going to the tonic chord of E flat major, he slips in a D flat and says, aha, you're expecting a tonic chord of E flat major. I'm going to tweak that a little bit and call it a dominant 7th in A flat major, so that the next chord can be the tonic chord of A flat major. So do you see how fast the key movement has been in this phrase? It's a whole load of 5 1s, but it's going 5 1 in B flat. But when you get to 1 in B flat, it's not 1 in B flat, it's 5 7 in E flat. So then it goes to 1 in E flat, but it's not 1 in E flat, it's 5 7 in A flat. And then it does go to 1 in A flat. So very quick kind of modulation going on there. So that's a little bit wacky. But the most wacky is yet to come. Let's have a listen now to this last phrase. See what you make of this. Ooh, great fun. Now, let's look at where this starts. Well, the first chord is really is a 5 7 in first inversion in the key of B flat. So you think, oh, well, that's fairly normal. We're going to come back to B flat major. But having a 5 7 in B flat that you might be expecting to resolve to 1 in B flat, he then does this at the beginning of the next bar. And you're thinking, what is this? B natural in the bass, if you don't mind. Well, it's another 5 7, but this time it's a 5 7 in the key of C. So we haven't resolved a 5 7 in the key of B flat. We've just followed it with another 5 7 in the key of C. And then what do? When we move on to the next chord, we follow that not with a tonic chord of C, but with another dominant 7th in the key of D. What is Bach doing? So he's given us 3 5 7 chords on the trot, none of which resolve. Isn't that wonderful of him? So 5 7 in B flat, 5 7 in C, 5 7 in D. Whoa. And you hear they're all first inversion chords. Now that is pretty wacky, I'd say. Okay, interesting that the bass line, when you look at it, is kind of climbing up from the dominant to the tonic of D minor. And then you might notice that he does the same thing. He climbs up from the dominant to the tonic of G minor. So there's a little bit of a kind of hidden key movement going on in that scale form in the bass. But if you're asked to say which key you're in at this point, well, good luck. 5/7 in B flat, 5/7 in C, 5/7 in D. Which key are we in? Who knows? Okay, well, what happens next? He goes on to this chord, which at least it's a B flat major chord in first inversion. So he's got a whole series of first inversion, first inversion, first inversion, first inversion, first inversion. But this is an ordinary chord, if you like. So B flat major. Okay, so are we going to B flat major after all of that unexplained dominant seventh stuff? Well, it's B flat major, tonic chord, first inversion, bit of a passing note, just kind of moves up a bit. And then we have this little touch here. So, passing note in the bass. And this alto note feels as if it should be a passing note. It's kind of going parallel with the bass. So you sort of think double passing notes, but actually when you look at it, it's not actually passing from that note, but it's sort of passing from this tenor note, which is a bit naughty, isn't it? You don't normally pass from one part to another, but it's sort of what he's done. So naughty bark, but if your initials are JSB, you can do whatever you like. Don't have to worry about the rules. As long as it sounds good, that's the critical thing. Then, beginning of the next bar, diminished seventh chord again in G minor. So, okay, we thought we were going to B flat major, but then that E natural put us off the thread there. But now diminished seventh in G minor. And remember what we said about this bass rising to D minor, then rising to G minor. So diminished seventh in G minor to chord 1 in G minor. So you think, okay, G minor, that's fine. It's the relative minor key of the home key, so that's all good. And then you think, well, is he going to finish in G minor, or is he going to kind of find a way back to B flat major? Perfectly possible, because this G minor chord is chord 6 in the home key of B flat. Well, he then puts in an F natural passing note in the bass, which makes the chord a seventh, but it's also descending melodic minor, so that's all right. But then, what's happening now? Another one of these dominant seventh chords, first inversion. He's gone mad on these dominant sevenths in first inversion, and this time in the key of F. So you're thinking, okay, why are we using 5/7 in the key of F? Well, if it modulates to F, well, a tonic chord of F is the dominant chord of B flat, so that's all right. And we're just coming up to the last note, so that's probably what he's going to do. He's now going to go from there to 5 to 1 in B flat major. Does he do that? Does he? Heck, because in this chord he whacks an A flat in the alto, so he goes 5/7 in F. But remember, 5/7, this could be the 5/7 of F major, or it could be the 5/7 of F minor. Now what Bart does, he says, well, let's have a laugh now and turn it into a tonic chord of F minor. So we've borrowed that F minor. So what are we doing in F minor? On the penultimate note, just before the final note of the phrase. We do not want to be in F minor, but we are. There's F minor with a passing note in the bass. And where does he go from there? Well, he gets to this point and then says, I'm really enjoying these 5/7s in first inversion, so let's have another one. But this time it's a 5/7 in first inversion in the key of E flat. So we're thinking, okay, he's extended the length of the last note of the chorale, so he's got time to move. If it's a 5/7 in E flat, he's then going to go chord 1 in E flat major, and then he's going to go 1 in B flat major, and we have a nice plagal cadence. Does he do that? He whacks in a G flat in the alto. So the 5/7 in E flat turns out to be 5/7 in E flat minor. So it's the same trick that he played here. 5/7 in F, where you're expecting F major to follow, and F minor follows. 5/7 in E flat, where you're expecting E flat major to follow, E flat minor follows. And then, as if that isn't enough, he says, wouldn't it be fun if we suspend the tenor note? So you can see this F in the tenor is still going on here. And so you think, it's kind of going 9/8 suspension in the tenor. But the bass moves up, so you figure it 9/6. But basically it is a 9/8 suspension. So with E flat minor, And then you're thinking, E flat minor is supposed to have 6 flats, and we're at the last note in the chorale, and we're in a chorale that's got 2 flats. How on earth did we get from 6 flats to 2 flats when we're a Baroque composer who, generally speaking, is going to use neighbouring keys? Well, E flat minor. Well, on he goes, and he sticks with the E flat minor all the way through this corner with the odd passing note thrown in. Well, of course, chord 1 in E flat minor, well, it's a borrowed chord 4 in relation to B flat major because it comes from its parallel minor. So B flat major, parallel minor, B flat minor. Instead of using chord 4 from B flat major, 1 in E flat major, he borrows from the minor and says, I'll use chord 4 from B flat minor. So it's a borrowed 4. And so he can end up on 1 in B flat major. Does he do that? Almost. He gets here and then he does this little alto move with an accented passing note just to spruce it up a bit. And then you think he's coming to the very last bar, the last measure. It's finally going to be a tonic chord of B flat major. And it is, but not before we have a decorated 4/3 suspension in the tenor. So you can see and hear what's going on in this chorale, because at first sight you think, what is going on in some of these corners? Which key are we in? What are these chords? How do they function? And you could say that some of it doesn't actually function very much at all, corners like that. But use of chromatic chords, borrowed stuff, all rather fun, isn't it? To give us this, what even in Bach's terms, and certainly in relation to Baroque thinking, is a pretty wacky chorale. Put it all together, you get this. Absolutely fabulous chorale harmonization. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, you might like to go to our website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Now, if you click on courses on the home page, you'll have access to all of our many courses there, one of which is all focused on writing Bach chorales, harmonizing these chorale melodies in the style of Bach. Lots of people have to do this as an exam requirement for music exams, so it might be of particular interest to you. But if you're wanting to develop your harmonic skills, one of the best ways of doing it is through learning how to do this Bach chorale stuff. And you've seen in this video how that harmonization has worked out. So if you'd like to be able to harmonize that, well, have a look at the Bach chorale course. We've got other courses out there as well. The Advanced Theory course, for example, does quite a bit of harmonization, thinks about a figured bass and other things as well. Many other courses on lots of other topics that might be of interest to you too. If you go back to the home page, click on Maestros, and that will give you access to our international musical community. Fantastic group of people from all over the world, and lots of perks come with being a Music Matters Maestro. There are 3 levels, nothing to do with ability, all to do with access. So level 1 is a kind of support level, but it comes with various perks. If you want to go from there, you keep all the level 1 benefits. You can bolt on the level 2 benefits. That will include access to our monthly live stream. You can request topics. I teach for an hour. You can comment in the live chat, ask your questions. We all learn together. Fantastic interaction between members of the group. If you want to go a step further, you can go to level 3, have all the level 2 and level 1 benefits as well, of course, but access to discounts on courses, and to an additional monthly live stream where it's very much more one-to-one stuff, where you can submit a recording of you performing, or you can submit a composition you've done or a harmony exercise, a Bach chorale harmonization, for example, and I'll give you personal feedback on it. We share it with the group so we can all learn from each other. The live chat runs again so you can ask questions. You can be a passive observer if you want to be, or you can be an active participant in that. Many other things on the website. Do have a look and see what there is there that could really resource your musical journey. www.mmcourses.co.uk.